a brief conversation about your work, and I'm starting usually with a brief introduction about Porto Academy, and then yourself, and then we go for the talk. So starting as usual, thank you very much, everybody, for watching us tonight. This is part of the Porto Academy Talk Club that is running since June 2 until July 19. I'm Romullo Baratto, the managing editor of Art Daily Brazil. I'm talking to some of the guests together with Pauline Personeni, in charge of the editorial development at Aguiar Publishers and its digital platform Urban Next. For those who still doesn't know, Porto Academy is a kind of experience involving lectures, visits to important architectural sites, classes, exhibitions, and publications. Since its first year, more than 2,000 participants from 89 countries has already attended to the programs. And on the other hand, in the side of the guests is more than 150 guests from 30 different nationalities have participated. So a lot of very interesting people. Porto Academy proposes a powerful cultural and educational experience in dialogue with some of the most prominent and ambitious relevant architects worldwide. One interesting quote to start the conversations that I took from Porto Academy website. We admire the figures that dream about architecture, and that's why we have this afternoon William O'Brien Jr., principal of WOJR. Welcome, William. It's really nice to have you here. Just a brief introduction about actually Liam, right?
Yeah, I do go by the second half of William. That's right.
Yes, about Liam and his firm. WOJR is an organization of designers based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the US, that sees architecture as a form of cultural production. Their work extends across the globe and engages the realms of art, architecture, and urbanism. They have works in many places in the US, from New York to California, and also other parts of the world, as a pavilion for the 17th International Biennale in Venice. Besides that, Liam is an associate professor at MIT in the Department of Architecture, where he has been teaching for a decade now.
And 13 years.
13, wow. It's a hell of a ride, right? Other members of WOJR are affiliated with the Harvard School of Design and other universities in the US. Also, the firm has an ongoing collaboration with Collective LOK. Correct me if I spell it right. It's an architectural design group formed by John Lott, Liam, sorry, and Michael Kubo, right?
That's right.
And besides that, you have a project called Samara, an experimental product development together with the development team at Airbnb. In terms of prizes, Liam is the recipient of the 2012-2013 Rome Prize Fellowship in Architecture, awarded by the American Academy in Rome, and was awarded in 2011 with the Architecture League Prize for Young Architects and Designers. Well, it's a very impressive resume. And I think that one interesting point for us to start the conversation, Liam, is why an organization? Why do you call WOJR an organization of designers? And what does this brings to the table in the way you you work and deal with your projects.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that's a great way in, I think. Yeah. So we decided to call it an organization as a way to initially like dispel the assumption that our work is from a sole author. So WOJR are just my initials, William O'Brien Jr. And an organization is meant to kind of imply that we are a kind of non-hierarchical office. We do have hierarchy in the sense that there are people with more experience in the office and people with less. But you know, in terms of how the creative process works, in terms of how folks contribute, it's really non-hierarchical. We also liked the idea of the word organization because a lot of, this is maybe putting it a little bit too simply, but a lot of the way that we think about the making of architectures through ordering principles, organizing things, part-to-whole relationships. So there's a kind of nod to the way that we think about the making of architecture within that choice as well. But yeah, when people see WOJR, they often think, you know, initially that it's like a radio station or something, which it's not. But yeah, those are really the two reasons why we gravitated more toward an organization rather than, say, like a conventional term like office or studio.
Interesting. And how many people work there?
So we're 5 now. We take on folks every once in a while for what we call in the office Woodrow SP, which is Woodrow Special Projects. And so we grow a bit every once in a while. The Woodrow SP is designed to kind of be an alternative to an internship program. We kind of think about it a little bit differently. We think about like the bringing on of another person, not necessarily in a junior role, but potentially maybe having a different creative background or coming from a different discipline. And so when we have a Woodrow SP project, we kind of imagine it as like another member of our band for a little while, you know, jamming with us and helping us to kind of, you know, produce a thing which is maybe more informed by their background, their experience, their expertise. So yeah, but we're 5 now, which is what we've been for a while.
Interesting. Yeah. Now knowing the number of people, my second question, how the work is divided, is probably redundant because it looks, at least knowing the scale of the organization, that it's pretty. I wouldn't say flat, but probably everybody takes part in each of the projects, right?
Yeah, for sure. We especially now that we're you know, past, or let's say almost out of this COVID situation, we've kind of changed the way that we meet. You know, we have, just like many offices have, and I think that's been related to how we work. We tend to meet all as a group about everything, even though there are like pairs of team members who are jamming on the work. But there is, as I mentioned before, like a touch of hierarchy in the sense that there are 2 members of the team who have a bit more experience in terms of project management and in terms of client relations, and 2 others who are following that path. So typically we might have, you know, a senior associate with a designer working on a project. But, you know, we've got a couple of projects per pair. And yeah, everybody's chatting about and critiquing all of the projects.
Nice. Sounds like a very welcoming environment to work in.
We try. I mean, we do talk a ton about the culture of the office, and you know, in a kind of parallel dimension, I imagine teaching a kind of professional practice course, which is less about, you know, NCARB and AIA and more about the development of a culture of an office and how that's a design project in and of itself. Just I'm sure all architects who are trying to lead an office figure this out, but just understanding how much thought really needs to go into how to cultivate a certain environment within the office, and it's really needs to be deliberate rather than by chance. So we talk a lot about trying to have the office feel as though it's a kind of more academically oriented studio, even though we do, of course, face the realities of projects and the external forces of projects and clients, etc. How can we still produce the level of conversation that you have at an academic in an academic context? And so I think the people who come and join the team are people who are more academically minded, interested, as you said in the beginning, in architecture as an act of cultural production. So anything that we can do to kind of shape the conversation to be more, let's say, aware of our role in the production of culture, and that tends to be like through academic lenses, is what we try to do.
And all the other people in the office, in the organization, has an architectural background, or because I'm asking that because you work with in the intersection of art, urbanism, public spaces, and architectures. So maybe from other areas.
Yeah, I think each of the team members, Grace, Justin, Adam, and John, they all have architecture backgrounds, but I think they each bring a slightly different set of experiences and biases to the conversation. One might be a little bit more interested in, let's say, the kind of formal art-oriented way of thinking about a piece of architecture. Another might be interested in, how to vet that through like research and historical contextualization. Another might be really interested in like ways that we can think about representing those works of architecture, etc. So I think even though all the team members have an architecture background, there is this kind of diversity of biases and emphases that they bring to the conversation.
And speaking of these, not only intersection of these realms, but when we see the production of the organization, we see that it's not just architecture; it goes beyond, and I'm talking about the importance and how art informs your work. So I would like to hear from you the importance and really how do you relate these different fields to reach a specific project?
I love that question in a couple of different ways. So we don't think of ourselves as artists. The closest we get to that realm, I would say, is in the making of what we call like proto architectural objects. And if you're familiar with them, we have a set of objects called other masks, which kind of came directly out of a project called Mask House. And what we tried to do was to kind of extrapolate like a set of concerns or characteristics or issues that we're exploring in Mask House, and tried to make space for that outside of some of the more, let's say, the external forces that helped us produce a single iteration. So in other words, how can we take those interests, those issues, and develop them differently through a set of other, manifestations? So in that case, we were interested in symmetry, a threshold between one world and another, a kind of veiling of what was behind. And so masks became a really helpful way to explore that. And in the end, they did belong in a kind of art gallery context, because they are objects to be seen in the round, etc. But we kind of see them, instead of works of art, really as kind of proto-architectural objects. And there are other versions of those that we have done and we are continuing to do. The next one, or the most recent one, I should say, is a project called Vessels, which I've been testing out in a pedagogical context at MIT. We're developing a series of objects that can hold air, hold light, and that is being developed for a subterranean project that we're working on on the West Coast. So we try to kind of, like I said, I kind of extract modes of thinking and working from the project per se, and kind of make a separate space, because, I think when you're able to kind of produce a separate space for those kinds of tests, you're generating ideas that will ultimately be found elsewhere in future projects. But the other way that we think about art is by looking at art and, seeing how it enters our work. So one recent thinking about art that comes to mind is we were fascinated by Ellsworth Kelly's painted figures, really interested in the formal language that kind of is somewhere between like geometrically precise, but also other, like we're really interested in things that are difficult to categorize. And so those figures, if you can think about them, if you can picture them in your mind, we were interested in trying to reproduce through a more geometrically a precise way of drawing. And so what we did was we took each of the, we kind of traced them, and then we analyzed each of the line segments or curve segments and produced these colorful drawings that highlighted all of the moments where the degrees of curvature were similar and where they were different. And this was a way of thinking about, the production of those kinds of other figures in our work. So those are just two different kind of ways that we think about the role of art in our work.
Interesting to hear you describing these drawings, and when you say things that are difficult to categorize, and somehow it applies to your work as well. At least from my point of view, looking into the production of the organization, some projects are really hard to fit into one specific box. It's in multiple boxes at the same time. I feel that your work is also difficult to categorize in a very good way.
Yeah, no, I take that as a, I'm not sure if you meant it as such, but I take it as a compliment, because we do talk a lot about in my opinion, the best works of architecture are those that are difficult to place, difficult to immediately understand their lineage. They keep a viewer or a user coming back. There's like inherent contradictions within them. There's this balance of rationalism and idiosyncrasy in them. And, we strive to kind of offset particular readings of the work, right? So, if we kind of identify that the project is headed in a direction which is kind of singular in its reading, we're always thinking like, okay, well, how do we offset that? How do we undermine that in order to produce a kind of more, more of like more richness, more intrigue, more of a kind of palimpsest of different influences. It kind of relates to, a little bit relates to this term we use a lot, which is, architecture as an artifact. And the way I talk about it in school a lot is, a kind of inversion of archaeology. Like if you're looking at an artifact as an archaeologist, you're evaluating it from a formal, material, surface, decorative, all these different lenses, which give you clues about its culture, its user, etc. The same can be said for the architectural design process, right? All of those considerations ought to be embedded in a work of architecture, in my opinion. And so yeah, there's this idea of like architecture as artifact and how it kind of absorbs all of these different modes of influence. Yeah.
This interest in contradiction, maybe this is the source of interest in Labyrinths. I found it really interesting to see some experiments dealing with the typology and the idea of a labyrinth. Can you talk a little bit about it, please?
Yeah, labyrinths have been a topic of interest for us in a number of ways throughout the years. We've done a few proto-architectural objects that are labyrinthian. The one that comes to mind is a long white labyrinth that we worked on. And that was really an exercise, a kind of rehearsal of form and figure and topography. And so it was really a formal exercise first and foremost, but the theme of labyrinth has come back again and again in various other projects. For instance, this one that I just referenced in on the West Coast, which is going to be subterranean, we're bringing back a lot of the thinking about labyrinth. This project is one that is about kind of leaving the surface of this landscape and entering into a series of chambers that are interconnected and labyrinthian, going from one point to the next, and then returning. And so we're thinking about it both from a kind of formal standpoint in the past and now as a kind of ritual, in terms of how a space can be perceived. But yeah, I would say it's a theme that kind of comes back periodically.
I noticed, I found it really intriguing to see these experiments with labyrinths. And going back to the proto architecture experiments, I see a lot of experimentation in terms of forms, but also in terms of materiality. I would like to hear from you this exercise of back and forth, proto architecture to small scale installations or build architecture. Sorry for this noise in the street here. And how this build architecture, whether installations or not, inform back other proto architectures.
Yeah.
This dance between super small scale to urban scale and back.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this will answer that question, but we think a lot about the relationship between modes of fabrication and the characteristics of the material. So to give you a few examples, for a project called House of Horns, we are really fascinated by a couple of, lots of aspects of that project, but a couple of moments in particular are fantastical marble, large pieces, one being a fireplace, another being a column. And we were really, really interested in the relationship between geometry and the method of fabrication in terms of the production of surface in order to depict and relay or convey the veining, the kind of pattern and figurality of veining in that marble. And so, thinking about how to sculpt a belly and how that might be in line with a kind of centrifugal, pattern of veining was just like, for us, this incredible, dance between geometry, the material, and also, the method of craft. And so I think that same kind of triangulation between like the material properties, the geometry, and then craft pop up in a lot of our projects. Thinking about your reference to other masks, there's one mask that comes to mind, which is like a dark walnut. And we were really interested in the relationship between the orientation of the grain in opposition to the orientation of the raking of the mask, and really using this as opportunities to experiment with new, potentials in terms of what each of the materials can convey.
It's perceivable, this research, very touchable, kind of research you do with the materiality you're exploring. It's a beautiful work. I'd like to jump to another topic now, and it's about representation in architecture. I know you have the organization has a very big portfolio of projects. Most of those are still unbuilt, right? So it's pretty much in the realm of representation yet. So, but it's there to be seen and beautifully represented in drawings, models. I would like to hear from you the importance of architectural representation and how you tend to communicate architecture through these drawings while they're not still built.
Yeah, that's a really big one. Yeah, we can come into that conversation in a couple of ways. One way is to think about different forms of representation and their appropriateness for different aspects of a project. We have in the past thought a lot about the difference between like a conceptual diagram, a drawing that is made of edges, that is like maybe your typical plan or section, and then visualizations. And although those categories aren't so separate, there are drawings that kind of can cross those boundaries. We do think about those three types a lot. The first being one which is all about distillation, the reduction of the complexity of a project, and trying to really understand what a project is about and how that will help us develop a logic trail and decisions as we go through the project. And then the drawing, which is all about edges, is like hugely critical for us because it's the moment where we can start to compare seemingly disparate parts of a project, like the geometry and the silhouette or the figure of an aspect of a project with its materiality. And I love the idea that you could represent the edge of a grain of plywood in the same drawing that you would represent the edge of a wall section or something like this. And so we talk about it as a drawing that is representative of all the edges. And then the visualizations, I think, that's a really big topic for us. So we leverage visualizations for many reasons. I mean, we think a ton about the cinematographic quality of our work. We really need ways to test out atmosphere and to test out to actually see the rituals of the user played out in the space as a kind of test, that the conceptualization and the development of the work of architecture that we've been working on has the potential to produce the kind of environment that we think is is good for that particular project. And it's really our opportunity to start to layer over thinking about cinematography, the framing of those visualizations, the weathers, the wheres, all the things that, you know, imbue a project with life. And, you know, we're really committed to the development of those visualizations. Like one of the things that we thought about recently, this might interest you, is the difference between the constructed visualization, the visualization that we make as a kind of prediction or a kind of aspiration, and the visualization of the found condition, meaning like the constructed building or this constructed space. And since we're you know, only in the last few years really starting to build, that kind of distinction is really fascinating to us. So we've been experimenting with film and looking at like, what does it mean to record a space like in a dynamic way, not necessarily through motion, but through the, you know, not motion of the camera, but through motion, even if it's entirely subtle and almost imperceptible. What does it mean to try to what can you learn from a kind of an awareness of time and of air and of you know, it's a very different proposition, right? Like it's really about you're really opportunistic, you're finding, you're discovering, as opposed to when you're developing visualizations to predict or to anticipate what the space will be like. It's much more constructed, right, and contrived. And it's been really I would say like thrilling to find new architectures within the work of architecture that's being constructed. By that I mean, you know, you on visiting a site, you start to see that there are many projects within the project, right? Like to give you, so it doesn't remain so abstract, to give you an example, in the House of Horns project, there are 3 large light wells that will be mostly buried. And going to the site and seeing these objects before the earth was, you know, brought back around them was just such an incredible lesson that like there are architectures within the work of architecture. And it's like seeing the process of construction, I would say, is such a generative act, right? And the way that you record that, I think is a really critical, of critical importance.
Wow, this is really interesting. I'm eager to see this actually. How these architectures transform within the time. You know, cinema and film in architecture is a subject very kind for me. I'm really into this kind of conversations. My question is, you explore with film in already built spaces only, or also in unbuilt spaces, dealing with the 3D models, and you know, because it's also a way to explore the lived space, even though it's still not actually lived, but it's a prospection, you know. It's a tool, you know, it's a design tool as well.
Yeah, I would say film enters into the discussion about our projects in 2 different ways. In the visualizations that we are constructing, film references and you know, cinematographers whose work we admire, that helps us have conversations about the artistic direction of the visualizations. So like thinking of an example, like in you know, sometimes there's direct references to scenes in films. You know, there's a reference to The Shining in one of our House of the Woodland visualizations with balloons. There's a reference to in Uratu for Mask House, there are, one is more narrative based and one is more atmospherically oriented. But those kinds of references are really helpful, not necessarily for communication with an audience outside of WOJR, although that's great if that happens, but mostly for the conversations within the office, and with our visualization artist. Like how do we it's really difficult to convey quality sometimes, like qualitative aspects, and so to have these references really often proves vital. And then in terms of exploration of built work, film is really now just entering into the conversation. We've been working with a cinematographer at House of Horns, and we've been out there 3 or 4 times with Caleb, and trying to evaluate the difference between shooting a 40-second film of a still, right, and how that's so different than shooting a still, right? Like the way that the tree moves just a little bit because of the wind, and how that shadow then is, hits the wall differently, and how that activates the composition of the space is just wholly different. So the awareness of time and the awareness of atmosphere just comes to life. It's so much more with a film.
I'm passionate about this subject. We could spend hours about
we
it.
Can do, we could take it offline. Yeah.
I'm really. It's really interesting to see and know firms working with the moving image as a tool, not just a design tool, not just like a final product, but an experimental stage, in part of the designing process. It's wonderful, because as you said, it's a totally different situation to shoot like a 40 seconds, even though even if it's just like the trees of the leaves of a tree slowly moving, it's completely different rather than a photography. It's another thing, because there's a whole new dimension embedded in that representation. Unfortunately, we are running out of time already. It looks like we're here only for 5 minutes, but it's already 40. And just to wrap up, I would like to hear from you, and the audience is curious as well, about some clues on what you're planning to talk about, to present in the next edition of Porto Academy.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really links the thinking at the office and the thinking that we and my students and myself take on at MIT is this really broad question of the role of imagination. And what I mean by that is in what medium in the mind do we construct these images, and just really thinking about that creative act. And then, because I think for each of us, there's a different way that we're imagining. For you, somebody who's interested and passionate about film, maybe it's through a dynamic sequence or something like this. For somebody else who's fascinated by properties of geometry, etc., maybe it's through precise geometric relationships. And ultimately, I'm really fascinated with not only trying to understand how we imagine, but also in what ways that imagination gets sort of expressed or stunted by modes of representation that we have at our disposal. So, that relationship between how to produce an architectural design utterance in the world and where it has come from, it's such a fuzzy and interesting transformation, I think. And oftentimes, like I'm pretty compelled by this, the fact that ordinarily the imagination that one has conjured in their mind is not able to be kind of constructed in terms of its modes of representation. There's like an inability to have there be a kind of one-to-one correspondence, and I'm really interested in that. And so thirdly, you know, if there's the process of imagination, then there's the process of trying to represent that imagination. Thirdly, how do we then evaluate that mode of representation to determine its appropriateness, its goodness, its quality? And so it's this kind of like very broad conversation that I'm interested in. So at Porto and also at MIT, I would love to have conversations about that. And then, you know, we've designed an exercise that is very focused, that allows us to kind of think through all of those different aspects of imagination, representation, and critique of representation through a kind of formal exercise that has to do with has to do with stairs.
Amazing. Now I want to participate. Sounds really nice and interesting. Thanks. Thanks for the whole conversation. Actually, it was a pleasure. Just to finish our live session here, Porto Academy is open to all students as well, professionals worldwide, and it's happening from 20 to 27 July this month already at the Faculty of Architecture of the University of Porto, designed by Álvaro Siza. Other guests besides Liam, guests of this talks were Diogo Aguiar Studios, Salottobuono, Clancy, David Kohn, Raphael, Kadid, DFDC, Mao Architecture, Bêka and Lemoine, Walder, Nickisch, Experience, Léonard, Kadid, and Liam this afternoon/evening. Thanks again for your time. It was an enormous pleasure.
Much. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it.
Nice. It's really good to hear that from you. And thank you guys for watching. It was really nice to have you this evening. Bye bye.
Thank you so much.